Don't come home. Your sister doesn't want you there. My parents sighed. Years later, at my wedding, everything changed. My name is Callie Brennan. I'm 34 years old. And 5 years ago, my father left me a voicemail that was exactly 11 seconds long. 11 seconds. That's how long it takes to dismantle 29 years of believing your family loves you. I still have it saved in my phone. I've never deleted it. Not because it hurts to hear. Not anymore. But because on the days when I start to second-guess myself, when that old voice creeps in and whispers maybe you were the problem, I press play. And I remember. The voicemail said this. Callie, it's Dad. Look, Brooke's got a lot going on right now, and she'd rather you didn't come to the reunion this summer. Just sit this one out, okay? It's easier this way. Talk soon. Talk soon. He didn't call again for 14 months. I want to tell you what happened after that voicemail. I want to tell you about the 18 months I spent rebuilding myself from the ground up. About the 2 people who walked into my life when I had nothing left. And about the moment at my wedding. My wedding. When every person in that room finally understood the full weight of what my family had done. But first, I need to take you back. All the way back to the beginning. Because this story doesn't start with that voicemail. It starts much earlier. It starts with a little girl standing outside a closed bedroom door, listening to laughter she wasn't invited to join. I grew up in a yellow house on Sycamore Drive in a small town in western North Carolina. The kind of town where everybody knows everybody, where the church parking lot fills up on Sunday mornings and the high school football team is basically a religion. On the outside, the Brennan family looked like something out of a catalog. Dad coached Little League. Mom organized the school fundraisers. We had a golden retriever named Biscuit and a minivan and a trampoline in the backyard. We looked perfect. My sister Brooke was 3 years older than me, and from the moment I was old enough to understand the social architecture of our family, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. Brooke was the sun, and I was just a planet orbiting her. Brooke was luminous. She was the kind of beautiful that made strangers stop and stare, the kind of funny that made entire rooms erupt without warning. She played varsity tennis, she sang in the choir, she collected friends the way other people collect stamps. My parents looked at her like she was a miracle they were still surprised to have been given. They looked at me differently. I wasn't difficult. I want to make that clear because the story I'm about to tell you is one that families like mine have a very specific way of retelling. Where the one who eventually walks away becomes the villain, becomes the dramatic one, becomes the problem child who couldn't just be grateful. I was not difficult. I was quiet. I was thoughtful. I liked reading and drawing and making up elaborate stories in my head. I got good grades. I didn't drink in high school or stay out past curfew or give my parents a single real reason to worry. But I wasn't Brooke. And in my family, not being Brooke was its own kind of failure. The signs were there early. I just didn't know how to read them yet. When I was 9, I drew a picture of our family for a school project. The assignment was to draw something that represented home. I drew all 4 of us. Me, Brooke, Mom, and Dad, standing in front of the yellow house on Sycamore Drive. My teacher, Mrs. Hollis, pinned it on the bulletin board with a gold star. I brought it home so proud I could barely breathe. My mom looked at it for a long moment. Then she said, "Sweetie, why did you make yourself so big? Brooke looks smaller than you and she's older." That was it. That was the feedback. Not the gold star. Not the pride. Just the suggestion that I had taken up too much space, even in my own drawing, even in my own family portrait. I was 9 years old, and I erased myself and redrew the picture. I should have paid attention to what that moment meant. The pattern repeated itself for the next 20 years in 100 different ways, small enough to dismiss individually, devastating enough to destroy you if you let yourself see the whole picture at once. There was the Christmas I was 14 when I'd saved up 3 months of babysitting money to buy my mom a necklace. A little silver one with a bird charm because she always said cardinals were good luck. I wrapped it carefully, tied a ribbon around it, put it under the tree. Christmas morning, Brooke gave Mom a gift card to her favorite spa. My mom wore the spa gift receipt on her face for the rest of the day like a crown. The necklace went into a drawer. I found it there 2 years later when I was looking for a pen, still in its little velvet box. Still unworn. There was the summer I was 17 when I got a part in the local theater production of Into the Woods. Not a lead. I was in the ensemble, but it was the first time I'd auditioned for anything, and I was so nervous I had rehearsed in the bathroom mirror for 2 weeks straight. I told my parents at dinner. My dad nodded and said, "That's nice, Cal." Then he turned to Brooke and asked her about her tennis tournament. They came to 2 of Brooke's matches that week. They never came to the show. And there was the night before I left for college. The night that even now, I struggle to talk about without my chest tightening. I was going to UNC Chapel Hill on a partial academic scholarship. I had worked for that scholarship. I had worked for it. My mom made a nice dinner and I thought, this is it. This is the moment. They see me. They're proud. I sat down at that table ready to finally feel chosen. And then Brooke started crying. She was upset because her boyfriend at the time, Tyler, had been spending more time with his friends. My parents spent the entire dinner consoling her. By the time the meal was over, my scholarship, my college departure, my entire life transition had been discussed for approximately 4 minutes total. Brooke's love life got 47 minutes. I counted. I drove myself to campus the next morning. My parents didn't come. They said Brooke needed them. But here's the thing. And this is important, so stay with me. I didn't walk away from my family that morning. I didn't explode. I didn't issue ultimatums. I didn't write them a letter about everything they'd done. I just kept trying. Because when you've been taught from childhood that your needs are an imposition, you don't get angry. You get smaller. You convince yourself that if you just find the right angle, the right moment, the right version of yourself, eventually they'll see you. I spent 12 more years being smaller. I went home for every holiday. I called every Sunday. When Brooke got engaged at 27, I flew home immediately and threw her an engagement party with my own money. When she had her first baby, I took 2 weeks off work to help her recover. When she moved into a new house, I painted her living room over a long weekend while she directed me from the couch. And every single time I told myself, this is how you earn love in this family. You show up. You give. You don't take up too much space. But I didn't know it yet. I was running an account that was only ever allowed to deposit, never withdraw, never even check the balance. The voicemail came on a Wednesday afternoon in June. I was at my desk at work. I'm a landscape architect. I design parks and public green spaces. And my phone buzzed with a notification. Dad had left a voicemail. That was unusual. My dad wasn't a voicemail person. He either called until I picked up or he didn't call at all. I listened to it in the stairwell of my office building. "Callie, it's Dad. Look, Brooke's got a lot going on right now and she'd rather you didn't come to the reunion this summer. Just sit this one out, okay? It's easier this way. Talk soon." The family reunion. Our annual Brennan family reunion in Asheville, which had been a tradition for as long as I could remember. 60-plus people, aunts and uncles and cousins, a rented lodge in the mountains, 3 days of cookouts and hiking and sitting around bonfires telling stories. I had been to every single one since I was born. I listened to the voicemail again. Then I sat down on the cold concrete steps and stared at the wall. Brooke's got a lot going on. What did that mean? I'd spoken to Brooke exactly twice in the past 6 months. Once when I called to check in on her after she'd had a minor surgery, once when she called me to ask if I still had our grandmother's pie dish because she wanted to use it for a dinner party. Both conversations had been perfectly normal, unremarkable. There had been no fight, no confrontation, no drama. I texted my dad, "Can you call me? I'd like to talk about this." He read it. I watched the little check marks turn blue. He didn't respond. I called my mom. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been expecting my call. "Callie?" Her voice had that particular flatness I'd learned to dread. The tone she used when she'd already decided how a conversation was going to go. "Mom, Dad left me a voicemail saying I can't come to the reunion. Can you explain what's happening?" A pause. Then, "Brooke is going through some things. She just needs peace right now." "What things? What did I do?" "See, that's exactly it, Callie. You always make it about what you did. This isn't about you. It's about what Brooke needs." My jaw tightened. "I haven't even spoken to Brooke in months, Mom. What could I possibly have done? You have an energy that stresses her out." I sat very still with that for a moment. An energy. Not a behavior. Not an incident. Not a specific thing I had said or done that could be addressed or apologized for or discussed. An energy. Something I couldn't change because it wasn't actually about anything I'd done. It was about who I simply was. My existence was the problem. My energy. So, I'm being excluded from our family reunion because of my energy. Don't be dramatic. There it was. There was the word. Dramatic. The word that had been used to dismiss me my entire life. The word that meant, "Your feelings are too big for this conversation. Please make yourself smaller." I hung up. Sat in that stairwell for another 20 minutes. Then I went back to my desk and worked until 8 p.m. because I didn't know what else to do with myself. That night I drove home to my apartment. A nice one-bedroom in Asheville that I decorated myself that I actually loved. And I sat on my couch and realized something that should have been obvious for years. I was 30 years old. I had a career I'd built from nothing, a home I'd created alone, a life I'd stitched together entirely by myself. And I was sitting here trying to figure out how to shrink my energy so my sister would let me attend a family gathering. I had given 29 years of my life to people who saw me as a disruption to someone else's comfort. Before I tell you what happened next, because what happened next genuinely changed everything, I need to pause for just a second. If any part of this is resonating with you, if you've ever been told your feelings were too much, your needs were inconvenient, your presence was an energy problem, please hit that like button. Because this story is for you. Leave me a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and let me know. Have you ever been the invisible child in your family? I want to know. I read every single comment. Now, let me tell you what I did next. I didn't call my parents back. I didn't text Brooke demanding an explanation. I didn't write an impassioned email laying out a 30-year timeline of everything that had been done to me. I had done versions of all of those things before. Quieter, smaller versions. And they had never once changed anything. Instead, I made a decision. I would go to Asheville anyway. Not to the reunion, not to force my presence somewhere I wasn't wanted. But I was going to take the long weekend I'd requested off work, and I was going to spend it doing something I'd never once done in my adult life. Something for myself. I booked a solo cabin rental in the mountains. 2 nights, completely off the grid, no Wi-Fi, just the sound of the creek and the smell of pine trees and whatever I could carry in on my own back. I packed hiking boots and a journal and a book I'd been meaning to read for 6 months. I left my apartment on a Thursday morning, and I drove up into the mountains, and I breathed for the first time in what felt like years. On the second morning, I hiked to a ridge that looked out over the entire valley below. I sat up there for a long time with my journal, and I wrote down, for the first time, everything. Every birthday that had been an afterthought, every holiday I'd spent performing gratitude for a family that barely acknowledged I was in the room, every moment I'd swallowed my hurt and apologized for having feelings. I filled 12 pages. When I finally closed the journal, I felt something unfamiliar. Not anger. I knew anger. Not sadness. I knew that too. This was something quieter. Something that felt like ground solidifying beneath feet that had been stepping carefully on ice for 3 decades. Clarity. I hiked back down the mountain. And at the bottom of the trail, I ran into them. They were standing at the trailhead looking at a paper map. An actual paper map. Arguing cheerfully about which direction led to the waterfall. A man and a woman in their mid-60s, both of them in good hiking gear, both of them with the comfortable ease of people who have been bickering with each other for a very long time and love every minute of it. "We need to go left," the woman was saying firmly. "The map says right, Diane." "The map is wrong, Jean." "The map is a professional cartographic document." The map was printed in 2009. I laughed out loud. It was involuntary. They both looked up, startled, and then the woman, Diane, broke into a wide, immediate smile, the kind of smile that feels like a door swinging open. "You know this trail?" she asked me. "I just came down it," I said. "The waterfall is left. She's right." The man, Jean, looked at the map, then at me, then back at his wife. "Fine," he said, with the satisfaction of a man who finds losing to his wife fundamentally enjoyable. "Left it is. You're a lifesaver," Diane said to me warmly. "Are you heading back down? We just started. Do you want to walk with us to the waterfall first? We have snacks." And here's the thing. Every instinct I'd developed over 30 years of learned to some smallness said, don't impose, don't intrude, they're being polite, you'd be in the way. But 12 pages of journal sat warm in my backpack. And something in me said, try. "Sure," I said. "I'd love that." Their names were Jean and Diane Calloway. They were from Charlotte. Gene had been a civil engineer before he retired. Diane had been a high school music teacher for 32 years. They had 2 grown children, a son named Derek and a daughter named Fiona, and 3 grandchildren. They had been married for 39 years. In 30 minutes on a mountain trail, I learned more about them than I had ever known about my parents' interior lives. Because Gene and Diane asked me questions. Real questions. Not the performative housework that got answered and immediately forgotten, but actual questions. Follow-up questions. Questions that made clear they were actually listening. What made you go into landscape architecture? Diane asked, stepping over a route on the trail. I wanted to make places where people could breathe, I said without really thinking about it. Public spaces, parks, places where people go when they need to feel like there's still something good in the world. Diane stopped walking for a moment, just stopped and looked at me. That, she said, is a beautiful way to think about a career. I had to look away because my eyes had filled with tears so fast it shocked me. We reached the waterfall. We sat on the rocks and ate trail mix from Diane's pack, and Gene told a story about a hiking trip he and Diane had taken in their 30s that had gone spectacularly wrong, and Diane kept interjecting corrections that were funnier than his original story. And I sat there in the September sunlight with cold water misting my face, and I thought, this is what ease feels like. When we finally made our way back to the trailhead, Diane turned to me with that open-door smile. What are you doing for dinner tonight? I was just going to cook something at the cabin. There's a wonderful restaurant in town. Come with us. Oh, I couldn't. You absolutely could, Gene said. Diane will talk about the music she's teaching for the rest of the hike anyway, and I need a second opinion. That is also true, Diane confirmed cheerfully. I went to dinner. Over pasta and good wine, I found myself talking more freely than I had in years. About my work, about the projects I was proudest of, about a community park I'd designed in a neighborhood that had never had one before, where I'd watched children play on the opening day and cried the whole drive home. They listened to all of it. They asked more questions. At the end of dinner, Gene raised his glass and said, "To Callie, who sends people to waterfalls and builds parks where children can breathe." I didn't trust my voice enough to respond. I just raised my glass. When we said goodbye in the parking lot, Diane reached into her bag and pulled out a small card. "Gene and I do a big dinner every couple of months," she said. "When you're back in Charlotte, I hope you'll come." I took the card. Diane Calloway, it said, with a phone number and an address in the Myers Park neighborhood. "Thank you," I said. "For today. All of it." She squeezed my hand. "Thank you for coming to the waterfall with us. It meant more than you know." I didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. I went back to Asheville. Back to my apartment, my routines, my carefully maintained life. A week passed. Then 2. My parents made no contact. Brooke sent a single text after the reunion. A group photo of the whole family, 60-plus people in matching blue shirts in front of the lodge, with a heart emoji caption. I wasn't in the photo. Of course I wasn't. She'd sent it to the family group text. She had included me on a group text specifically to send me a photo of the family event I'd been excluded from. I stared at that text for a long time. Then I left the group chat. No announcement. No drama. I just quietly removed myself, the way I'd been quietly removing myself from every situation that hurt me for 30 years. But this time felt different. This time, it felt like a choice. Not an escape. A choice. I texted Diane Calloway that Friday afternoon. "Hi, this is Callie. We met on the trail in the mountains last month. I'm going to be in Charlotte next weekend for a work project. Any chance that dinner invitation is still open?" She texted back within 3 minutes. "It is absolutely still open. I've been hoping you'd reach out. Come Saturday at 6. I'll make the chicken." I went. The Calloway house was a big, warm colonial in Myers Park. The kind of house that had been lived in thoroughly. Where every wall had photos and every bookshelf was genuinely full, and the kitchen smelled permanently of something good. Gene answered the door in an apron, which I later learned was a permanent Saturday fixture, and ushered me in like I'd been coming to this house my entire life. Their son Derek was there with his wife, Priya, and their twin boys, who were 8 years old and who immediately demanded to know if I could solve a Rubik's Cube. I could not. They were deeply unimpressed. Their daughter Fiona was there via FaceTime on a tablet propped against the fruit bowl. She lived in Portland, and she waved at me warmly through the screen like we were already friends. The dinner lasted 4 hours. I don't have words for what it felt like to sit at that table. I've tried to find them, and I always come up a little short. The closest I can get is this. It felt like color, after years of living in a carefully maintained gray. Not because anything dramatic happened. Nobody said anything earth-shattering, nobody saved me or fixed me. We just sat around a table and talked and laughed and ate good food and were present with each other. Genuinely present. At one point, Diane told a story about a student she'd had 30 years ago. A boy who had been told by everyone that he had no musical talent, who she'd kept after school 3 days a week just to let him play without being evaluated. And I watched her face as she talked about him. The love on her face. The absolute certainty that this boy had mattered. What happened to him? I asked. He's a conductor in Berlin now, she said simply. He sends me a card every Christmas. I excused myself to use the bathroom just to press a cold cloth to my eyes for a minute. Because what I was feeling wasn't sadness exactly. It was grief. Grief for all the years I had spent at a table where nobody ever looked at me like that. After dinner, while Jean and Derek were doing the dishes and the boys had fallen asleep on the couch and Fiona had signed off from Portland, Diane and I sat on her back porch with tea. The backyard was full of rose bushes she'd planted herself, and the October evening was cool and still. Tell me something, Diane said. When we met on the trail, you were coming down alone. No friends, no partner. You were on a solo trip. Why? I had known, sitting down with this woman, that she was the kind of person who would eventually ask the real question. I had been waiting for it. I told her the truth. About the voicemail. About the reunion. About 29 years of being the invisible daughter. I kept my voice steady. Kept it factual, the way you describe a weather event rather than a wound. But by the end, my hands were wrapped tightly around my mug and the October air felt colder than it had. Diane was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Not uncomfortable silence. Thinking silence. The silence of someone choosing their words with real care. I taught high school for 32 years, she finally said. And in that time, I watched a lot of families. And I learned something that took me a long time to put into words. She looked at me. Some parents have a limited capacity for love. Not because they're monsters, but because they're afraid of it. Of the full, equal, unconditional version. So they pour it into one place and ration it everywhere else. And the child who gets rationed, that child spends their whole life believing the ration is what they deserve. My tea had gone cold. I hadn't noticed. You're not the leftover, Callie, she said. You never were. You were just raised in a house that made you feel like one. I couldn't speak. You're someone worth knowing, Diane said simply. I've known you for 6 hours over 2 evenings, and I can tell you that with complete confidence. I want to stop here for just a moment, because if this story is getting to you, if you've ever been the rationed one, the one who got the leftover love, I want you to do something for me right now. Leave a comment below. Tell me, did someone ever show you for the first time that you were worth knowing? Because I believe those moments change lives. I believe they changed mine. And if you're finding value in this story, please hit that like button so someone else who needs this can find it. I came back to the Calloway house many times after that. Not because I planned to. It simply became natural, the way all the best things become natural. Gene started texting me when he had a new trail recommendation. Diane called occasionally just to share something funny that had happened that week. When I had a particularly hard day at work, a project I'd been working on for 8 months got canceled due to budget cuts. It was Diane I called. She picked up on the second ring and spent 45 minutes reminding me of every other thing I was building. Slowly, something was happening that I didn't have language for yet. I was being held, not rescued. Not fixed. Held. The way you hold something fragile not because it's broken but because it matters. It was during this time, about 8 months after that first dinner, that I met someone. His name was Owen. He was a friend of Derek's from college, and he showed up at a Calloway dinner one evening with a bottle of wine and the easy confidence of someone who had grown up in a house where he'd been genuinely loved. He was a writer. He covered environmental issues for a national magazine. And when Diane introduced us and mentioned my work in landscape architecture, he turned to me with genuine curiosity. Parks and green spaces, he said. Tell me about the connection between access to green space and mental health outcomes. I looked at him. How much time do you have? He smiled. Diane made her brisket. I have all night. We talked for 3 hours at that dinner. About urban green space and environmental justice and the specific geography of loneliness and what it means to give people places to breathe. He had done his homework. He knew things I hadn't expected him to know. And every time I made a point he hadn't considered, I watched him genuinely integrate it, watched him change his thinking in real time. I had never in my life had a conversation where I was treated as an authority on my own expertise. I drove home that night shaky with something I barely recognized. Over the next few months, Owen and I became friends. Real friends, the kind who text random questions at odd hours and argue passionately about things that don't matter and sit next to each other at Callaway dinners with the unconscious ease of people who have decided, without announcing it, that they belong together. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, somewhere between the dinners and the hikes and the long drives and the conversations that kept going past midnight, I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I hadn't called my parents in 4 months. And I hadn't noticed. Not because I decided to cut them off dramatically, but because my life had quietly become so full that the absence of their absence wasn't absence at all. I was full. I was present. I was whole. I didn't know my biological family was about to remind me exactly why. The call came on a Tuesday in March. Brooke. Her name flashed on my screen, and for a moment I just looked at it. It had been almost a year since the group text photo. Before that, 6 months of nothing. We hadn't spoken in 18 months. I answered. Callie. Her voice was strange. Strained in a way I didn't recognize. Mom and Dad told me you've been out of contact. Hi, Brooke. Are you seriously not going to come home for Easter? Mom is upset. I took a slow breath. I haven't been invited to come home for Easter. You don't need an invitation, you're family. Something in me went very still. You told Dad you didn't want me at the reunion last summer. I got an 11-second voicemail. That felt pretty much like an uninvitation, a long pause. That was. Callie, that was different. I was going through something. What were you going through? It doesn't matter. The point is, Brooke. My voice was quiet, not unkind, just clear. I'm going to ask you a question, and I need an honest answer. In the last 20 years, can you name one time when you advocated for me? One time when you stood up for me or acknowledged that I might have needed something from our family that I wasn't getting? Silence. I'm not asking to hurt you. I'm asking because I need to understand. You're being dramatic. There it was. Same word. Different mouth. No, Brooke, I said. I'm actually being very calm. And I think that's why this conversation is uncomfortable for you. Because you're used to me getting upset, and you're used to using that to make me the problem. And I'm not upset right now. I'm just clear. She hung up. 40 minutes later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She left one. Longer than 11 seconds this time, nearly 4 minutes. In which she explained in considerable detail how hurtful and selfish I was being, how my sister was struggling and I was making everything about myself as usual, and how she was very disappointed in the woman I'd become. I listened to it once. Then I called Diane. She said you've become someone she doesn't recognize. Diane said after I read her the key parts. Is that true? Yes. Good. Her voice was warm and unwavering. The person she recognized was a girl who had learned to disappear. I hope you never go back to being someone she recognizes. I held the phone to my ear and looked out my apartment window at the mountains in the distance. Diane, I said, thank you. For all of it. For the waterfall. For dinner. For Callie. She interrupted gently. Don't thank me. You made space for us in your life. That was your choice. Your courage. I just showed up to the table you set. Owen asked me to marry him on a Wednesday evening in April. Not at a restaurant. Not with a grand public gesture. That wasn't either of us. We were at Diane and Jean's house, actually, sitting on that same back porch after dinner, the rose bushes coming into bloom again, and he turned to me and said quietly, like it was the most natural sentence in the world. I've been trying to figure out the right words for 6 months. So I'm just going to say the ones I mean. I want to spend my life choosing you, Callie. Every day. Without reservation. He took a small box from his jacket pocket. Callie Brennan. Will you marry me? I looked at this man who had listened to me with full attention from the very first night, who had never once made me feel like a disruption or an inconvenience or too much. Who had seen me, actually seen me, and chosen to stay in the light of that seeing. Yes, I said. Absolutely yes. He slipped the ring on my finger. Through the kitchen window, I could see Diane and Jean standing at the sink. Diane was crying. Jean was pretending not to notice. They had known, apparently, for months. Owen had asked Jean's permission. Not because he needed it, but because he wanted to honor what this family had become to me. That, I think, is when I understood fully what I had been given. Wedding planning is beautiful chaos. Venues and florals and catering and seating charts and 1,000 decisions that each feel enormous until suddenly the whole thing materializes and you realize you've built something from nothing. But there was one decision that kept me up at night. The wedding program would list parents of the bride, Linda and Robert Brennan. My biological parents had not called me since I'd stopped returning their calls 5 months earlier. They had not acknowledged my engagement when they heard about it through the extended family grapevine. They had not sent a card or a message or anything at all. And yet, I knew that somewhere in the back of my mind I was still carrying the ghost of the little girl who had erased herself in that family portrait at 9 years old, who had redrawn herself smaller because she'd been told she was too big. Part of me still flinched at the idea of officially, publicly, naming someone other than my parents in that program line. It was Jean who finally said what I needed to hear. He said it simply, the way Jean said everything. We were sitting in his study one evening while Diane and Owen were in the kitchen. He was showing me a photo album. Pictures from his own wedding, young Diane in white, young Jean looking stunned with joy. And he paused on one and said without looking up, "You know, Diane and I talked about it a long time ago. When you came into our lives. How to do right by you." I looked at him. We didn't want to overstep. We didn't want to take something that wasn't ours to take. But Diane kept saying, he smiled at the photo, "Jean, it's not taking. It's being available. And she'll decide what to do with that." He closed the album and looked at me steadily. "Whatever you decide to put on that program, Callie. Whatever you decide about all of it. Know that we are already your family. That happened a long time ago on a mountain trail. The paperwork is just paperwork. What if I wanted to make it official?" I said quietly. He blinked. "How do you mean?" I looked into it. Adult adoption. It's a real legal process. And I wondered if maybe. Jean stood up from his chair, crossed the small study, and pulled me into a hug so immediate and so complete that I burst into tears before I could stop myself. "We would be honored," he said into my hair. "We have been hoping you'd ask." The adoption process took 7 months. Forms and court appearances, and a family law attorney named Patricia Nguyen who Diane found through her network and who was brisk and competent and kind. There was a hearing before a family court judge in Charlotte on a December morning. Cold and clear, the kind of day that feels lit up from inside. When the judge signed the final order, I became Callie Calloway. Jean shook the judge's hand. Diane was crying before we even left the courtroom. Owen had been waiting in the hallway with a small bunch of flowers, and when we came out, his face told me everything. The twins, Derek, Priya, Fiona, on FaceTime from Portland. Everyone was there or present in some way. That evening, Diane and I sat at the kitchen table after everyone else had drifted to other rooms, and she took both my hands in hers. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it. Really thought about it. "Like I've been traveling for a long time," I said. "And I've finally arrived somewhere." She nodded slowly. "Home," she said. "Home," I agreed. The wedding invitations went out 6 weeks later. On the line that read "Parents of the Bride," Jean and Diane Calloway, it read, "The family who chose her." I should have known the Brennans would eventually find out. My cousin Margot texted me 3 weeks before the wedding. "Callie, I heard you changed your last name. Is that true? Your mom is freaking out." I didn't respond. 2 days later, my mother called 8 times in a row. I let every call go to voicemail. Then a text. "This is unacceptable. You are our Dector. I don't know what those people have done to your head, but we are your family. Call me immediately." I read it once. Felt nothing. That in itself felt like a kind of grace. The absence of pain where pain used to live. Not numbness. Peace. Owen found me in the kitchen that evening looking at my phone. "My biological family found out," I said. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing," I said. And I meant it. Whatever you need, he said. And he meant that. I hired a coordinator for the wedding who happened to have experience with complicated family situations. A charming euphemism that basically meant she knew how to place security personnel at a reception without it feeling like a security presence, a quiet precaution. Because I knew my mother. And I knew that being ignored was something Linda Brennan had never once in her life accepted gracefully. The wedding was held on a Saturday in June. A renovated barn in the rolling countryside 40 minutes outside Charlotte, surrounded by fields we'd planted ourselves for the occasion. Wildflowers, native grasses, the kind of landscape that breathes. Jean had built the arbor by hand over 3 months. Diane had sewn ribbon into the chair covers. Derek and Priya had organized the catering. Fiona had flown in from Portland and was doing double duty as a bridesmaid and the person in charge of keeping the twins from eating the entire dessert table before dinner. In the bridal suite, Diane stood behind me and adjusted my veil in the mirror. "You look exactly like the person you were always supposed to be," she said. I looked at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was someone I recognized now. Not someone I was still trying to earn. On the vanity sat the wedding program. I picked it up. Read the line. Parents of the bride, Jean and Diane Calloway. Below it, in small italics, the family who chose her. I set it down and looked at Diane. "Whatever happens today," she said, "you are loved completely. Before this ceremony, during it, and after. Nothing that happens today changes that." "I know," I said, and I did. For the first time in my life, I genuinely did. There was a knock at the door. The coordinator, Marta, stepped in with the professional calm of someone who had navigated harder situations than this. "Callie. 2 people at the venue entrance. They say they're your parents. They don't have invitations." Owen appeared behind her in the doorway. His face was carefully neutral, but his eyes asked the question. I thought about it for 1 full minute. Let them in, I decided. Not to forgive them, not to give them anything. But because this was my day. My beautiful, carefully built day. And I was not going to let the fear of them diminish a single moment of it. Let them see what they lost. Let them witness the life that grew in the space they left. Put them in the back, I said. Not near the family. And tell them there will be no disruptions. Marta nodded and was gone. Diane looked at me in the mirror. Are you sure? I'm sure, I said. I want them to see. Before I tell you what happened. Before I tell you about the moment that silenced the entire room. I have to ask you something. If you were standing where I was standing in that bridal suite on the most important day of your life, with 2 people outside who had spent 30 years making you feel invisible, would you have let them in? Or would you have had them turned away at the gate? Type yes or no in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Because there's no right answer. And what you do says something real about where you are in your own story. Subscribe if you want to see what happens. And now, let me tell you about the moment. The ceremony was everything. Jean walked me down the aisle, steady and proud, the way a father walks a daughter. Not like he was giving me away, but like he was walking me toward something he'd always known was coming. Halfway down, he leaned slightly toward me and said, barely audible, "I'm the luckiest man at this wedding." "You're biased," I whispered back. "Completely," he agreed. At the altar, Owen looked at me the way I'd spent a lifetime watching other people be looked at, like I was the whole point. Our vows were our own words. Owen had written his in longhand and kept them in his jacket pocket, and when he read them, his voice only broke once. "On the line, I choose you, Callie. Not because you need me to, but because choosing you is the best thing I've ever done." After the ceremony, the reception unfolded in the golden light of a June evening. Music, dancing, the clink of glasses, the mingling of 100 people who had gathered to witness something real. I saw my biological parents arrive, Robert and Linda Brennan, standing at the edge of the room in their good clothes looking uncertain. Robert had aged considerably. His shoulders had the particular curve of a man who had been burdened by regret for a long time and didn't know how to set it down. Linda's eyes were scanning the room with the quick assessment of someone searching for the social geography, trying to locate where she stood. I watched them from across the room and felt nothing hostile, just clarity. The same clarity I'd found on that mountain ridge the morning after the voicemail. The kind of clarity that doesn't need to be angry because it's already sure. The MC stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just one moment. The room quieted. Glasses paused. Conversation softened. I'd like to take a moment to introduce some very important people. Please join me in celebrating the parents of the bride. Across the room, I saw Linda straighten. I saw her chin lift slightly, her posture shift in preparation for acknowledgement. Please welcome Jean and Diane Calloway. The room erupted. A standing ovation, warm and genuine. 100 people who had witnessed the story of this family. Who had heard it from Owen, from Fiona, from Derek, from the twins who had told their school friends their adopted aunt was getting married. All of them celebrating with full knowledge of what this moment meant. Jean and Diane stood from the head table, beaming, holding each other's hands, waving at the crowd. Diane was crying and not trying to hide it. Jean was trying very hard not to cry and absolutely failing. Across the room, my mother's face had gone the particular white of someone whose understanding of reality has just shifted on its axis. I watched her piece it together. The applause continuing. The Calloways at the head table accepting congratulations. The program in someone's hand nearby. Parents of the bride. Jean and Diane Calloway. Her eyes landing on it, reading it again. Linda grabbed Robert's arm. Who? What is? The applause hadn't even died down before she was moving through the crowd toward me. I had been waiting for this. Some calm, prepared part of me had known this was coming and had decided already exactly what kind of woman I intended to be in this moment. She reached me. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with the particular electricity of a woman who has run on narrative control for 3 decades and has just lost it entirely. Callie. Her voice was a harsh whisper. What is going on? Who are those people? My parents, I said. We are your parents. You were, I said quietly. You chose not to be. That is absolutely. Mom. I kept my voice even. Gentle. Even. Because I didn't need to be angry. Anger was for people who were still fighting to be seen. I had already been seen. I was adopted 2 years ago. Legally, officially. Jean and Diane Calloway are my parents. You can be upset about that, and I understand if you are. But it is the truth. Robert had followed her. He stood slightly behind her, and I looked at him. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time. And I saw a man who had spent his life in retreat. Not from malice. From fear, from cowardice, from the accumulated habit of choosing the easier path every single time until the easier path became the only one he knew. And on his face was something I had never once seen in all my 30 years. Grief. Callie. His voice was rough, cracked at the edges. Robert, don't. My mother's hand on his arm. Callie, I owe you an apology. He shook his head, his eyes wet, a real one. Not on the phone, not in an email, here. I was a coward. I knew. I always knew it wasn't fair, what was happening in our family. I saw it and I chose not to see it. I told myself it was peacekeeping, but it wasn't. It was cowardice. Every single time. Linda's jaw tightened. Robert, I let them treat you like you were less than, he continued, voice shaking. You were my daughter. My little girl. And I let them convince me you were the problem when you never were. The room around us had gone very quiet. People nearby had stopped pretending they weren't listening. I looked at my father. This man who had failed me so completely, so quietly, for so long. And I felt something complicated move through me. Not forgiveness, not yet, and maybe not ever in the way he might want. But recognition. Recognition of a man who had finally, too late, found his voice. I know you're sorry, Dad, I said. And I believe you mean it. But sorry doesn't give me back the graduation you missed, or the birthday parties, or the years I spent trying to shrink myself to fit into a family that had already decided I didn't fit. Sorry is a beginning. It's not an end. He nodded. Tears on his face now, not even trying to stop them. I know. I know it isn't. Linda had gone somewhere beyond words. She was looking at me the way I imagined she looked at students who'd failed a test she was sure they'd pass. Disappointed, yes, but also confused. As though she genuinely could not locate the mechanism of how this had happened. Jean appeared at my shoulder. Diane at my other side. Owen took my hand. Gene Calloway, as I have said, was not a confrontational man. In 4 years of Sunday dinners, I had never once heard him speak with anything other than warmth and humor and the easy certainty of someone who is comfortable in his own skin. But he looked at Linda Brennan now with a steadiness that needed no volume. "I think," he said quietly, "this has been enough for tonight. This is Callie's wedding day. And I won't let anything compromise that. You have no right." With respect, Jean said, "I have every right. I'm her father." Linda opened her mouth. Closed it. "You know what Callie told us?" Jean continued. "The first night she had dinner at our house? She said she couldn't remember the last time someone asked her a question and actually waited for the answer. She said she couldn't remember what it felt like to be the most important person in a conversation with her own family." The silence around us had expanded now. 10 people nearby, 20, all of them very still. "She was 30 years old when she told us that," Jean said. 30 years old, and she couldn't remember feeling wanted by the people who were supposed to want her most. He looked at Linda Brennan, and there was no cruelty in his face. Just truth. "We didn't steal your daughter," he said. "You had a daughter who deserved to be chosen first, and you chose someone else every time. She didn't leave your family. Your family made her invisible. And she did something brave. She built a new one." The security coordinator appeared at the periphery. Jean nodded to her, then looked back at Linda and Robert one last time. "Tonight is a celebration," he said. "I'm going to ask you to let it be one." Before they were escorted out, I raised my hand. Everyone waited. I stepped forward, close enough that only they could clearly hear me, and I said what I had decided, long ago on that mountain ridge, that I would say if I ever had this moment. "I don't hate you. I want you to know that. I've made my peace with who you are and what you were able to give me. You weren't monsters. You were people who had a limited capacity for the kind of love I needed, and you gave what you had to Brooke, and you ran out before you got to me." My mother's eyes glistened. "But I stopped waiting for what you couldn't give me. And I found it somewhere else. And I want you to understand. This isn't revenge. It's not drama. It's just the natural result of your choices meeting mine." I looked at them both. This man and woman who had made me, who had housed and fed me and given me a last name and a room in a yellow house on Sycamore Drive, and who had never once made me feel like I was worth choosing. "I hope you're well," I said, genuinely. "But I'm not going to keep a seat open for people who never kept one for me." I nodded to the security coordinator, and I turned back to my wedding. The rest of the evening was everything. We danced until the barn rang with it. Diane and Jean spinning each other with the easy expertise of 39 years. The twins dancing with enormous theatrical commitment in the corner. Owen twirling me until I was dizzy with joy and completely unable to stop laughing. The cake was cut. Toasts were made. Fiona gave a speech via video from Portland that made every single person at that wedding cry, including Jean, who had previously been claiming to have something in his eye. Before the last dance, Diane found me on the edge of the dance floor. She didn't say anything for a moment, just stood beside me, watching the room. Then, "Are you okay?" "Yes," I said. And I meant it completely. She took my hand. "You were magnificent tonight," she said quietly. "Every second of it. The ceremony, the moment with the Brennans. All of it. I was scared. I admitted. I know. That's what magnificent means." Owen appeared and held out his hand for the last dance. I took it. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. I laughed. "That's going to take getting used to. Take all the time you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." A week after the wedding, my phone filled up with messages from extended Brennan family members who had heard about the reception. The usual variety. Outrage, concern, questions that were really accusations. I deleted them all. But there was one text I kept. My Aunt Ruth. My father's sister, a quiet woman I'd barely known growing up. Sent a single message, "Callie. I always wondered why you seemed so alone at family gatherings. Now I understand. I'm sorry none of us did better. You deserved more and I was a coward for not saying so sooner. Congratulations on your wedding. You looked genuinely happy. That's the whole point, isn't it?" I read it 3 times. Then I texted back, "Thank you, Aunt Ruth. That means everything." And it did. My mother posted something on social media. I didn't see it directly. Someone forwarded a screenshot. A long statement about family loyalty and ingratitude and the difficulty of raising children who reject their roots. I read it once, recognized it immediately as the performance it was, and felt nothing except a distant, almost clinical appreciation for how consistent she had remained. I blocked every Brennan account, every Brennan number, not in anger, with peace. The same peace you feel when you close a chapter of a book that ended exactly as it was always going to end. Owen found me on the balcony of our honeymoon suite that evening, looking out over the vineyards in the sunset. "You okay?" he asked. He always asked. "More than," I said. He sat beside me and I leaned into him and we stayed like that for a long time, watching the light change over the vines. "Do you think you'll ever have a relationship with them again?" he asked. "Your biological family." I thought about it honestly. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe someday my father, if he keeps doing the work." The apology he gave. That was real. That was the first real thing he ever gave me. But real apologies are beginnings, not endings. He'd have to prove it over time. "And your mother," my mother would have to become a different person, I said. And people rarely do. A long quiet. The light going gold over the rows of vines. "But I don't need them to change," I said. That's the thing I couldn't see for 30 years. I kept believing that if I was patient enough, understanding enough, if I forgave the right way and stayed the right distance and found the right words, eventually they'd become the family I needed. But that's not how it works. You can't love someone into becoming capable of loving you. You can only decide what you're willing to wait for. And you're done waiting, Owen said. "I'm done waiting," I said. And my life is so full I can barely see the gap. 2 years after the wedding, Owen and I bought a house. A white Craftsman with a big porch and a wild backyard that I've been slowly turning into a native plant garden. Jean and Diane live 20 minutes away. Sunday dinners continue. The twins are 10 now and still unimpressed with my Rubik's Cube abilities. Fiona came back from Portland and took a job in Charlotte. She and I have coffee every Thursday. Derek and Priya announced they're expecting a third child, and the whole Calloway household is in a state of happy uproar. I'm still a landscape architect. I just finished a project I'm more proud of than anything I've built before. A community park in a neighborhood that has never had one, with native plantings and a playground and a small amphitheater for summer evenings, designed specifically to give people a place to breathe. On the opening day, I stood at the edge of the park and watched children run through the space I had made, and I thought about 9-year-old Callie redrawing herself smaller in that family portrait because she'd been told she was too big. And I thought about what it means to build something that tells people, "You are welcome here. You deserve to take up space. This was made for you." That is what I built. It is what I will always build. Diane texted me a photo that evening. A picture she'd taken at the ribbon cutting without me knowing. And in the photo, I am standing at the entrance to the park with the afternoon light behind me. And on my face is an expression I barely recognized the first time I saw it. I looked happy. Genuinely, simply, completely happy. Not performing happiness. Not hoping it would be noticed. Not holding my breath, waiting for someone to diminish it. Just happy. I sent it to Owen and he texted back. "There she is. There she is. I'm going to tell you something directly now, if you've watched this far. If this story has found you because something in your own life echoes something in mine, then I want to say it plainly. You are allowed to stop earning your place. You are allowed to stop auditing your own behavior for evidence that you deserve love. You are allowed to stop making yourself smaller, quieter, less. You are allowed to stop waiting for the people who were supposed to choose you first to finally get around to choosing you. And you are allowed to build something new. The family I was born into taught me that I was too much. The family I built showed me I was exactly enough. The difference was not me. I was the same person, carrying the same needs, asking for the same basic human thing. The difference was the people. Some people can love you the way you need to be loved. Some people cannot. And the painful, liberating truth is that the ones who cannot are not necessarily monsters. They are just limited in ways that were never your fault and were never within your power to fix. The scapegoat in a family. The invisible child. The one who gets the ration of love while someone else gets the feast. That child is not the problem. That child is just the one who most clearly sees the problem. And seeing it clearly, naming it honestly, refusing to pretend otherwise. That's not drama. That is just the truth. Told plainly.
by someone who finally stopped being afraid of it. If you've been the invisible one, if you've been told you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too much, if you've spent years bending yourself into smaller and smaller shapes trying to earn what should never have required earning in the first place, I see you. You are not the problem. You never were. And somewhere, maybe on a mountain trail, maybe at a restaurant table, maybe in the most ordinary, unexpected moment of an ordinary, difficult day, there are people who are already capable of loving you the way you deserve. Not perfectly, but fully, consistently, without requiring you to shrink. You just have to be willing, when they open the door, to walk through it. I found my people. They found me on a trail with a paper map and an argument about which way was left. And everything. Every hard thing, every erased portrait, every 11-second voicemail, every family dinner where I felt invisible. All of it led exactly here. To a white craftsman house with a wild garden. To Sunday dinners that run late. To a man who asks my opinion and actually waits for the answer. To a mother and father who chose me out loud on paper in front of a judge and have never stopped choosing me since. To a life that is full. To a life that is mine. If my story touched you in any way, if any part of it felt familiar, felt like something you needed to hear today, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Leave me a comment and tell me, have you ever had to rebuild your family from scratch? Have you ever found your people somewhere unexpected? I read every single comment, and I mean that. And if you want more stories like this, I've linked some of my favorites in the description below. Until next time, remember, you deserve to be chosen, not as an afterthought, not as the acceptable sacrifice, not as a backup when someone else isn't available. Chosen first, chosen fully, chosen without conditions. That is not too much to ask for. It's the very least you deserve. Go find your people.